Hey everyone, this is Nick with Tenacity.ai, and you're listening to the Cloud Cost Optimization Podcast. Today I'm joined by my co-host Jason, and we're going to discuss one of the big FinOps myths that's out there. I know we've been covering a couple of these in various episodes, but this one's around an objection we hear often, especially in organizations that are maturing in cloud, that are scaling in cloud, who are kind of on that tipping point of needing to understand how to better manage their costs or control their costs inside of the cloud, whether in AWS or Azure or Google as well. And that is the myth that the provider tools are enough in order to run your FinOps organization or to give you the insight necessary in order to maximize your savings or your benefits from using cloud. So Jason, let me turn it over to you with the first question of, are the provider tools, the AWS tools, the Azure tools, the Google tools that they give you natively, are those enough to manage cloud spending?
Enough? I mean, listen, I think each provider has probably 4 or 5 different interfaces that you have to learn, maybe even more, maybe up to 10, just to manage your cloud. I mean, I think they just actually give you too much. I mean, there's no way to really understand, like, how do I go get the information that I just need from a collection of 5 to 10 different tools in AWS and 5 to 10 tools in Azure? So one person's going to go learn 20 different things and how to manage all these things separately. It just doesn't, the providers give just the information that they want to give you, right? And so it has to be suitable for, AWS has what? Millions of customers. So this has to work for millions of customers. And it has to be basic enough that it kind of covers the gamut. And I think once you start to, on most companies that try to start with using the provider tools to understand where their cloud spend are going, give up pretty quickly. Because it's the person that they're asking to management is not a technical person. And anything in the Azure or AWS console is a technical tool. It's not geared towards the user experience necessarily, and they do get better and better and better, but at the end of the day, you're dealing with way too much data. And so what you really need is a tool, or tools in some cases, depending on what your needs are, to help you, one, navigate through all the mess, right? I mean, the data in which AWS gives you for a month of usage can be measured in dozens of gigs and hundreds of millions of lines of billing data. It's almost impossible to sift through unless you have a tool that's helping you, and it leads you down the path of exactly where you need to go to understand where your costs are going, how I can save money, how I can better leverage commitments, et cetera, et cetera.
I would say there's a common theme I've seen in the AWS side of it, not as much so in the Azure side of it. I think the Azure tooling maybe is a little better here, but they attempt to use the provider tools, and there are some good uses of those tools at a certain size. And that size is sort of mid. It's kind of modest scale. It's smaller environments. Though I would say, being a professional in this space using those tools, sometimes they're very frustrating to get to the data I actually want to see. One. And the progression then that folks take, because I think they feel that same frustration, is then they start using the actual billing data and pulling it into some other tool that they can do analysis, whether it's into an Excel spreadsheet or whether it's trying to do it with Power BI. So they're immediately going from kind of the complexity of the tools inside of the providers, and they're a little bit disparate. They don't necessarily give them everything they need easily. Now they're going into this kind of bake it themselves, build it their own way. And it takes a tremendous effort to get sort of what you want out of those tools. And we've seen this a number of times. And so that highlights, I think, problem number one is that the provider tools are, like you said, they're technical, and they don't necessarily give you the context you want or the context that is for you. They definitely do things in their own context. think it's kind of the second issue is the recommendations that these tools make, or the way that they give you visualization of the data is to the benefit of the provider. Very clearly the case in AWS. AWS doesn't tell you about a lot of things you could clean up in the environment or configure a little differently to save money. They tell you all sorts of things about how you can commit to spending with them for the next 3 years and save a bunch of money. And those are great. Those are great options, but it's one piece of a much bigger puzzle in how to optimize an environment or save money in the environment. So that's two.
They could be
3
dumb,
it's
too.
actually pretty... Right.
Yeah, go ahead with your 3. I'll follow up with the dumb comment.
Well, yeah, and so I think a third one is that the tools don't always give you data, or it's really hard to get data in your specific context. Like that's a difficult proposition inside of AWS or Azure to really get to your business context. Like, how do I look at this from kind of a cash flow and I want to understand kind of my what's going up, what's going down, where's my variance, what does my forecast variance look like, where are there anomalies that are going to drive that. Those are all the data's there, but you have to do a lot of work to actually get to it. And I think the fourth thing when you look at this being a myth is that none of those tools really help you bring the whole picture together across a multi-cloud environment. And most organizations are going multi-cloud. So there are use cases for Azure, AWS, Google that we're seeing inside of organizations. That very rarely is an organization single provider.
Yeah, I agree with that. The dumb comment comes from sometimes they don't even understand stuff in their own context. As an example, Azure gives recommendations to delete unattached disks from VMs. They give that same recommendation on their disaster recovery service disks, in which they know aren't connected to virtual machines until you spin up disaster recovery. So Azure will tell you to go delete all of your disaster recovery infrastructure just because they're not attached to virtual machines when their own service dictates that it's not attached to a virtual machine. So sometimes they're stupid. And so when they don't understand even their own context, what credibility do the rest of the recommendations from Azure Advisor mean to me? If Azure Advisor doesn't even understand how Microsoft Azure's own services work, then the rest of it doesn't mean anything to me. And Azure Advisor gives you your reserved instance recommendations. It gives a bunch of security recommendations. So I think people can rely too much on the entity that's billing you to make sure that you're not spending the most amount of money. It makes little sense to me in the grand scheme of things that I would trust the company that their shareholders benefit the most by me paying more to them. They're going to tell me that I can save 70% on my bill? No, it ain't happening. It's not happening. If you think it is, continue to do that. Keep on going with it. Microsoft Azure. Keep on lining Jeff Bezos' pockets. He needs a third support yacht based on your overspending because you're trusting the provider's tools to tell you how much you should be spending. He needs a support yacht for his support yacht now, which you'll pay for if you're continuing to use those tools.
And I think this is evident in the way the tools are presented, right? When I look at tools that I use in this space, what data are they giving me to tell me about their primary use, right? And so when I think about the provider tools versus Tenacity, in Tenacity you always see your effective savings rate. In fact, that's the thing you're always driving towards is how do I drive or maintain my savings rate. And so a lot of the context in the platform is around making sure you're managing to that rate or towards the improvement of that rate. You don't find that inside of the provider tools. They're not telling you how efficiently you're running your environment. And so that's usually a key indicator to me that tool is there. It's there because it's necessary for them to provide a tool to give insight to their users,
Correct.
But it's not there to actually drive outcomes on behalf of the user.
Correct. Well said.
Well, why don't we end it there then?
I think so, man. That was a perfect way to end it. That should be like the title of this episode, actually. That was a nice, we can keep all this shit in here too. Oh, yeah. Anyway, this one isn't for the car with the kids in it, I guess. Anyway, all right.
All right, fantastic. Well, hey, thanks everybody for tuning into the Cloud Cost Optimization Podcast. Head up to tenacity.ai to learn more, and tune in next week where we'll discuss some more topics diving into, say, variable spending and why it's not as evil as people think it is, and how it actually is an advantage when you're inside of cloud. So, thanks everyone.